A civilization may master astronomy, mathematics, writing, engineering, and statecraft, yet still be undone by the very incentives that made it brilliant. That is the paradox at the heart of the Maya collapse. Not ignorance, but sophistication. Not sudden disappearance, but the shattering of political legitimacy across one of the most intellectually accomplished worlds of the ancient Americas. The Maya world, at its height, was not an empire in the style of Rome, nor a centralized dominion under one unquestioned sovereign. It was something at once more elegant and more unstable, a constellation of city-states, dynasties, vassal courts, and competing sacred capitals spread across the lowlands and highlands of Mesoamerica. Between roughly AD 250 and AD 800, this world produced a civilizational flowering of extraordinary range. Monumental cities rose from carefully engineered landscapes. Kings recorded dynastic triumphs in carved stone. Scribes mastered one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the pre-Columbian Americas. Astronomers tracked celestial cycles with astonishing precision. Farmers intensified production through terraces, raised fields, reservoirs, and local adaptations to difficult environments. Trade and tribute moved prestige goods, practical resources, and symbols of legitimacy across long distances. It was, in every visible sense, a civilization of competing miracles. But the map of that world concealed its first great vulnerability. The Maya realm was multipolar. Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque, Caracol, Dos Pilas, and countless lesser courts maneuvered not merely for land, but for status, captives, tribute, and prestige. Every city was a node in a larger system of alliance and rivalry. Every king ruled beneath the gaze of enemies, allies, noble houses, and the gods. Therefore power could never be passive. It had to be performed, renewed, and dramatized. Maya kingship was not a simple administrative office. A ruler was expected to be a sacred broker between the human community and the cosmic order. The king did not merely govern, he mediated continuity itself. Harvests, rainfall, victory, dynastic succession, public ritual, monumental construction, and the rhythm of sacred time all converged upon the royal body and the royal image. If a king triumphed in war, commissioned monuments, staged rituals, and kept his court prosperous, his legitimacy deepened. But if military defeats mounted, if food grew scarce, if building ceased, if ritual life faltered, then the failure was not interpreted as a narrow policy error. It threatened the theological architecture of the state. A king who could not deliver order risked proving that the gods had withdrawn their favor. That is why the collapse of many classic Maya centers was so devastating. What was at stake was not merely whether a city remained inhabited, or whether a dynasty controlled tribute routes, or whether a court could defeat a rival in battle. What was at stake was the credibility of an entire political theology. Once subjects ceased to believe that the center could guarantee prosperity, victory, and cosmic balance, monumental authority could erode with astonishing speed. Yet the phrase, Maya collapse, has often been made misleading by its own drama. It suggests a single fall, one terminal event, one civilization ending at a precise historical moment. That is not what occurred. The unraveling was regionally uneven. The southern lowlands saw the sharpest political disintegration between roughly AD 750 and AD 900. Inscriptions thinned. Monument erection slowed or ceased. Palaces and royal compounds were abandoned. Dynasties disappeared from the written record. But farther north, major centers later rose to prominence, including Chichen Itza. Maya peoples did not vanish. Languages, lineages, cultural memory, and communities endured. What broke in many regions was not a people, but a specific political formula, the divine, court-centered system of the classic southern lowlands. The deeper tragedy is that many of the pressures that destroyed that formula emerged from success itself. Population concentration had grown around major urban centers. Agriculture had intensified to sustain courts, nobles, artisans, laborers, and ritual specialists. Reservoirs and water management systems became increasingly essential in landscapes defined by seasonality and ecological limits. Monument competition among elites consumed labor, resources, and attention because stone was not merely decorative, it was political argument. Warfare imposed further burdens, drawing off labor, destabilizing vassal regions, and raising the constant costs of defense and retaliation. Prosperity had created density. Density required management. Management increased complexity. Complexity amplified fragility. This is where the strategic dimension becomes decisive. The Maya collapse was not simply a natural disaster that descended upon passive societies. It was accelerated by decisions made under pressure. Dynasties gambled. Alliances hardened and shattered. Punitive raids multiplied. Fortifications appeared in places where confidence had once made them unnecessary. Noble factions pressed their claims. Military elites gained influence. Prestige competition rewarded visible strength, but punished strategic restraint. Therefore each kingdom had incentives to preserve its own status immediately, even when the collective effect was to make the entire system more brittle. The long rivalry between Tikal and Kalatmul captures this dynamic with particular force. These were not merely large cities competing for local advantage. They functioned as superpower centers within a larger diplomatic and military web. Their contest shaped the fortunes of subordinate and allied kingdoms across the Maya lowlands. Proxy struggles spread instability beyond the principal antagonists. A defeat in one zone could shift the allegiance of vassals in another. A captured ruler could transform regional calculations overnight. A victory inscription raised prestige, but also signaled danger to rivals who could not afford to appear weak. In such an environment, every local dispute risked becoming an episode in a much larger balance of power struggle. Warfare in this period must therefore be understood in strategic, not romantic, terms. For generations, Maya conflict was sometimes portrayed as largely ritualized or symbolic. But evidence from the late Classic period points to something harder and more destructive: intensified conflict, captive-taking, dynastic overthrow, site destruction, fortifications, and the political use of terror. This was not modern total war. But neither was it harmless ceremonial combat. War disrupted labor. War damaged legitimacy. War severed tribute relations. War removed rulers, shattered succession, and replaced predictability with fear. A city-state system built on prestige could survive occasional defeats. It struggled to survive recurrent strategic destabilization. Court politics deepened the danger. A Maya king was never alone atop an obedient pyramid of power. He presided over a court of nobles, military commanders, scribes, ritual specialists, allied kin, rival lineages, and local power brokers, all of whom had interests to defend and ambitions to advance. In such systems, moderation can become politically expensive. If kingship is judged through victory, monumentality, tribute flow, and ritual magnificence, then caution may appear as failure before it is ever vindicated as prudence. A ruler considering de-escalation had to weigh not only the enemy, but the perceptions of his own court. Restraint could invite noble dissent. Tribute concessions could signal weakness. Reduced monument programs could imply divine disfavor. Therefore systems designed to display permanent confidence often become incapable of admitting vulnerability. Climate pressure entered this already dangerous world not as a single all-explaining cause, but as a force that altered the strategic equation. Paleoclimate research points to multi-decade drought episodes affecting parts of the Maya region during the broader period of late Classic decline. Drought did not create collapse in a vacuum. The Maya had long managed environmental variation with skill and ingenuity. But severe or repeated rainfall shortfalls could tighten water supplies, undermine reservoir reliability, stress food production, and intensify competition over arable land and labor. Under such conditions, a bad harvest was no longer merely a local hardship. It became a political test. A sacred king who could not secure abundance faced not only hungry subjects, but a legitimacy crisis. A rival who sensed weakness might raid. A vassal who doubted protection might defect. A noble house observing shortages might maneuver for succession. Therefore environmental stress translated into strategic instability. Trade and tribute networks also became vulnerable. The court-centered economy of many Maya polities depended not simply on subsistence agriculture, but on broader systems of exchange and redistribution. Prestige goods mattered because elites used them to reward loyalty, stage status, and materialize hierarchy. Tribute mattered because it linked peripheral communities to royal centers. Roads, waterways, allied corridors, and political obligations formed the connective tissue of this order. But when warfare expanded and trust weakened, those systems began to seize up. Subordinates no longer reliably delivered support. Trade became riskier. Access to elite goods narrowed. Court largesse diminished. Therefore the very instruments by which rulers maintained loyalty became harder to wield. At the center of the collapse lies a brutal strategic thesis. The Maya world did not merely suffer disaster. It made disaster more lethal through the logic of competitive sovereignty. Every kingdom sought to preserve honor, advantage, and sacred standing. Every court had reasons to protect itself first. Every ruler faced immediate pressures that rewarded visible action over long-term resilience. Yet the aggregate result was systemic breakdown. Civilizations are often destroyed not because no one understands danger, but because each center of power confronts danger through incentives that magnify it. By the 8th and 9th centuries AD, the system began turning against itself. This was not one battle, one monarch, one conquest, or one year of doom. It was a chain reaction. Drought weakened harvests and strained reservoirs. Scarcity sharpened elite competition. Warfare disrupted labor and trade. Disrupted labor undermined infrastructure. Weakened infrastructure magnified the next drought. Tribute faltered. Monument programs slowed. Ritual life became harder to sustain. Royal authority appeared less effective at the precise moment it most needed to appear invincible. Each crisis fed the next. Such breakdowns are hardest to arrest because they damage the tools required for recovery. Reservoirs need labor. Terraces need maintenance. Fields require predictable organization. Roads and exchange routes need security. Courts need surplus to reward loyalty. Armies require provisioning. Ritual calendars require stable institutions. But when harvests contract and warfare intensifies, labor can no longer be directed coherently. Men are drawn into conflict. Local communities hoard resources. Peripheral zones withdraw obedience. Noble factions protect private interests. Therefore the state loses the coordination capacity that once made complexity possible. Certain political pivots were especially dangerous. Defeat in war could trigger cascading vassal defections. Dynastic capture could produce succession crises, rival claimants, and court paralysis. Internal rebellion could expose the king as vulnerable before enemies near and far. Failed succession could fracture a polity into competing legitimacy narratives. Most devastating of all was the inability to stage the rituals that proved kings still commanded cosmic order. In the Maya world, pageantry was not superficial ornament. It was constitutional performance. Ritual, monument, and public ceremony reassured the population that the bond between dynasty, gods, and community remained intact. When those performances ceased, the silence itself became political information. This raises one of the most important features of the collapse, the information problem. In a fractured political world, rulers operated under deep uncertainty. No king could know the full depth of water reserves across his territory. No court could perfectly predict rainfall patterns over years or decades. No dynasty could accurately read the intentions of every rival, the loyalty of every subordinate, or the hidden stockpiles of every noble faction. Intelligence was partial. Messages arrived late. Public information was distorted by propaganda, ritual optimism, and strategic deception. Under such conditions, miscalculation became fatal. A ruler might launch a campaign to restore prestige, believing the enemy to be weak, only to discover that local allies were less loyal than expected. Another might divert labor into monument construction to project confidence, only to find that reservoir maintenance had been neglected too long. A court might assume a drought was temporary and manageable, but face repeated failures instead. A subordinate city might rebel too early, expecting support that never arrives. Every actor moved through fog. But because kingship demanded confidence, few could publicly acknowledge how little they knew. Therefore uncertainty was not merely a background condition. It was an accelerant. The archaeological and epigraphic record preserves the visible edge of this unraveling. Inscriptions become less frequent. Monument erection declines. Some once dominant centers cease to project the old certainty of dynastic continuity. Palaces and elite compounds are abandoned. Population thins or disperses. Political centrality erodes. In some places, defensive concerns reshape settlement patterns. In others, the ceremonial heart no longer commands the same labor or devotion. This is not a theatrical instant of apocalypse. It is, in some respects, more unsettling, a world in which the institutions that once made order believable gradually lose their authority, then their capacity, then their followers. Urban abandonment, in this light, must be understood as a political verdict. Subjects leaving a center were not merely fleeing hunger in a narrow biological sense. They were withdrawing consent from a state that could no longer protect, feed, organize, or persuade. That decision may not have taken the form of modern ideology. It may have been dispersed, practical, local, and gradual. But its significance was profound. A sacred court survives only so long as people continue to orient labor, loyalty, and belief toward it. Once villages, lineages, and local leaders decide that the center no longer justifies the burdens it imposes, the city begins to empty from within. This makes the collapse of legitimacy the core event, not merely an effect. Drought alone does not explain why one polity fails faster than another. Warfare alone does not explain why monumental systems cease. Economic strain alone does not explain why dynastic narratives vanish. But when ecological stress, military pressure, trade disruption, and elite competition converge, legitimacy becomes the hinge. So long as a ruler can convince enough people that order will be restored, labor and loyalty remain mobilizable. Once that conviction fails, the machinery of the state seizes up. The city does not fall only because resources decline. It falls because authority ceases to command coordinated sacrifice. It is crucial, however, not to mistake asymmetry for contradiction. Not every Maya center collapsed in the same way or at the same pace. Some suffered catastrophic declines. Others adapted, shifted, migrated, or transformed. Regional ecologies differed. Political networks differed. Water systems differed. Local leadership differed. Some areas retained viability longer than others. Some communities reoriented rather than disappeared. The old order broke before a new one fully emerged, and that interregnum produced a patchwork of silence, survival, improvisation, and reconfiguration. This unevenness is one reason the phrase, collapse, must be handled with discipline. It should not erase continuity. Maya peoples endured. Cultural memory endured. Languages endured. Communities adapted. Trade persisted in altered forms. New centers emerged elsewhere. The later rise of northern powers demonstrates not the extinction of civilization, but the reorganization of political and demographic gravity. What ended in many southern lowland regions was a courtly formula rooted in divine kingship, dense dynastic competition, and a monumental performance of cosmic order. The aftermath therefore teaches a hard distinction that many modern societies struggle to understand: a state can fail while a civilization survives. Royal capitals may empty. Dynasties may vanish from inscriptions. Palaces may cease to function as command centers. But people continue to marry, plant, trade, worship, remember, adapt, and transmit identity. History too often grants all meaning to capitals and all silence to communities. The Maya case resists that distortion. It is a story of political collapse, but also of social endurance. Still, endurance should not soften the strategic lesson. The psychology of elite systems remains one of the most revealing dimensions of this history. States that depend heavily on the visible image of control often become trapped by that image. The greater the need to appear divinely favored, militarily capable, economically generous, and richly confident, the harder it becomes to reduce consumption, admit vulnerability, negotiate from weakness, decentralize authority, or alter incentives before crisis becomes terminal. In prosperous times, this dynamic can look like magnificence. In times of stress, it becomes paralysis disguised as ceremony. That is one reason advanced knowledge did not guarantee resilience. The Maya possessed scientific sophistication. They understood time, cycles, celestial regularity, landscape management, and the organization of large populations with remarkable skill. But technical brilliance in one domain does not automatically generate institutional flexibility in another. A society may read the heavens with precision and still fail to redesign a prestige economy that rewards overextension. It may build reservoirs with intelligence and still lose the political cohesion necessary to maintain them under duress. It may preserve exquisite records of dynastic glory and still remain unable to solve the incentive problems created by rival sovereignty. Knowledge is not the same as adaptability. The macro lesson is therefore not that climate determines history, nor that war alone destroys civilizations, nor that inequality by itself explains every fall. Collapse is rarely monocausal. It is usually the convergence of environmental stress, political rivalry, militarization, social hierarchy, institutional rigidity, and failures of legitimacy. Each factor may remain survivable in isolation. Combined, they produce compounding pressures. Combined, they alter behavior. Combined, they make short-term rationality feed long-term ruin. This is the deepest strategic horror of the Maya collapse. The kingdoms were not simply inert victims waiting for catastrophe. They were active participants in a system whose rules pushed them towards self-defeating choices. A ruler who escalated war might preserve prestige today while undermining labor and trade tomorrow. A noble who pressed for monumentality might defend status in the present while draining resilience from the future. A subordinate city that defected from a weakened overlord might secure immediate autonomy while helping unravel the wider order on which its own prosperity depended. Each choice could be intelligible. Collectively, they became disastrous. The result was silence in places where kings had once spoken in stone. But silence should not be mistaken for mystery alone. It was also testimony. It testified that a political theology had reached the limit of its persuasive power. It testified that sacred kingship could not indefinitely absorb strategic defeat, ecological pressure, and social strain without losing credibility. It testified that human societies can construct institutions of dazzling sophistication, yet still tie those institutions to incentives that corrode resilience from within. The verdict, then, is stark. The Maya world did not break because it lacked intelligence, culture, or achievement. It broke in many regions because a highly sophisticated civilization became trapped inside a competitive political order that magnified stress faster than it could absorb it. Drought sharpened the crisis. Warfare accelerated it. Trade disruption spread it. Elite rivalry deepened it. But the decisive wound was the collapse of political legitimacy. Once enough courts could no longer convince enough people that the old bargain still worked, the monumental order of the classic southern lowlands began to hollow out from the center. The cost was immense. Dynasties vanished. Cities lost their populations. Regional networks fractured. The old ceremonial confidence dissolved. Generations who had lived beneath the promise of sacred mediation faced a world in which the center no longer guaranteed survival. Yet even here, history refuses melodrama. The Maya people endured beyond the failure of Maya states. Communities adapted beyond the fall of courts. Civilization persisted beyond the silence of capitals. The modern mirror is not a crude warning that every contemporary society is simply another Maya kingdom awaiting drought. History deserves more seriousness than that. The true reflection is subtler and more unsettling. Advanced systems often assume that intelligence, data, technical achievement, and visible complexity are proof of resilience. But the Maya case warns that brilliance can coexist with catastrophic failures in governance. Institutions can become so dependent on prestige, growth, competition, and the appearance of control that they lose the ability to retreat, simplify, share burdens, or confess risk. The danger begins when maintaining the image of stability becomes more politically rewarding than building actual resilience. That is what this ancient collapse reveals about human nature today. Power is rarely blind to danger in the abstract. More often, power is trapped by incentives that make the necessary response feel too costly in the present. Rival states fear appearing weak. Elites resist sacrifice. Institutions defend their image. Leaders gamble under uncertainty. Populations tolerate strain until legitimacy breaks. Then systems that once looked permanent can suddenly appear fragile, not because the final blow was unprecedented, but because trust, coordination, and belief had been eroding for years beneath the surface. The silence of many Maya cities was not the end of a people. It was the end of a political formula. And history returns again and again to that lesson: when prestige outruns resilience, when competition devours coordination, when sacred or secular authority cannot admit vulnerability, even the most dazzling order can become brittle. The legacy question is therefore not whether civilizations fall. History has answered that many times. The harder question is this: when a society's institutions begin rewarding the defense of status over the repair of fragility, at what point does collapse cease to be a disaster that happens to a civilization and become a verdict written by its own incentives?